Thank you, Fran. It's a huge honour to see you all. I'm absolutely delighted to be here. Thank you to Greg Towers and Richard Milne for inviting me and for curating a lot of my scientific career so far. I'm giving you a talk that I haven't given before. I've said some of it before, but I'm trying to put in new elements. And I've changed the title a little bit since I agreed it with Blizzard. The food environment is the interface that all of us have with the food around us. And it isn't simply the products that are there on the shelf. It is the advertisements, the taxation, the price points. And the modern food environment does not pride or celebrate what we traditionally define as food. So food should be a substance that nourishes us spiritually, culturally, mentally, socially, and yes, physically and psychologically. But those things are down the hierarchy. And our food environment has become so disordered that I think we are having an increasingly disordered response to it. So I want to talk you through the UK food environment, try and cover many, many years of the history of nutrition and nutrition science and bring us up to date with how we think about food and the wider commercial determinants of health. So what the science of ultra-processed food teaches us, not just about food, but about the commercial ecosystem that influences so much of our lives. I'm going to talk very specifically about who pays a lot of other people, so this is who pays me. My research is funded by philanthropies or MRC or Wellcome, and I do make royalties from the book that Fran mentioned, but I don't take any money from any of the industries that I'm going to talk about. Our diet makes us sick. We've heard the statistics on this so much that we've become a little bit numb to us. We've become almost numb to them. But we live a quarter of our lives in the UK in poor health. And more than a quarter of us live as adults with obesity. 10% of children are living with obesity by the age of 5, and 25% in lots on average by the age of 10. And in some communities, particularly low-income communities, it's more like 30%. Now, the food industry say that part of the reason for this is that the way we define obesity, the clinical boundaries we use, are so loose as to define lots of children who aren't in fact living with obesity as living with obesity. But in fact, the tighter we make that definition, that's if we use the working clinical definition, but if we use a tighter definition, we see that the rates of obesity, the prevalence has gone up more than double the rate of our clinical working definition. So the tighter you make the definition, the more severe the prevalence, or the higher the prevalence. And this obesity goes hand in hand with stunting. We're not merely living in an environment that promotes us eating too many calories. Those calories are very low quality. And the stunting, this is from the Lancet Global Burden of Disease study, this is not due to migration patterns, changes in population genetics. This is due to diet and a few other factors. So we are living in an emergency. That's the point of this slide, is we have presided, those of us who've been involved in policy or influencing the UK food environment, we've presided over this emerging catastrophe. It's been going on for more than 30 years. It's an emergency in the sense of it requires immediate action, and yet we're doing very little about it. What is axiomatic in this is that we are eating more calories than we burn. So in all the confusion around nutrition on the internet, where you will read that sugar calories are different to fat calories and protein calories are handled differently, broadly, that what we all agree on as nutrition scientists is that we are eating more calories than we burn. What there has not been in the UK or the US is an official government explanation as to why this is happening. So if we go to the NIH website or the NHS website or the Scientific Advisory Committee on Nutrition, there's no explanation about why we've started to do this. And what we are sure about is it's being driven by changes in obesity, particularly in low-income families. So if we look at the population prevalences, the increase is in the most deprived, while the least deprived areas have remained fairly stable. So this really, really tracks with access to health justice and health equity. Justice is a theme of this talk. So a lot of the time I'm portrayed as someone who wants people to eat less ultra-processed food, and I have no interest in how much people eat. What is very unfair is that we live in an unjust food environment where people are essentially forced to eat unhealthy diets. And the less money you have, the more you are forced to do that. So I just want to be really clear. That's the theme that's going to going to run through this talk. Our diet makes us sick. It also makes us poor. So this is data from the Tony Blair Institute. Direct and indirect costs of just obesity is 90 billion to the UK economy. And the Food, Farming and Countryside Commission estimate direct and indirect costs of poor diet at 268 billion. So that's roughly more than double the entire NHS budget. The cost of this stuff is, in economic terms, overwhelming. I think making the economic case is so repulsive, we shouldn't have to do it. You know, the moral case is very, very strong. But if you are right-leaning, you believe in a strong football team, a big military, if you're hawkish about economic growth, welcome to the talk for a start, but also the case I want to persuade you of is we really are all in this together. So what has been our theory of obesity and diet-related disease? What's very clear, I shouldn't speak for all nutrition scientists here, but I think there are lots of things we don't agree on, but pretty much we have very, very high quality evidence that we're eating too much salt, too much sugar, too much saturated fat, and too many calories. But as I say, what we haven't been able to explain is why. Traditionally, most of the explanation has been that this is a failure of willpower. This is CDC data from the US. This is data dealing with, as defined by them, black, white, and Hispanic groups, men and women, and the different lines at all ages. And what you can see is that everyone simultaneously starts to gain weight in the mid-1970s. Now, is it plausible that all these people lost moral responsibility simultaneously, or is it more likely that something in the food environment changed? I put it to you, it was the environment that changed. I think we can squash the willpower argument down to almost nothing, and I'd be very pleased to do that in the questions. And it's such a source of contention. People, especially who live with diet-related disease, we experience that when we eat food, if we eat harmful food, it is a failure of our own willpower. I want to really persuade you that it isn't, but if we need to explore that further, I'd love to do it. The other aspect to this, when I started writing about this or broadcasting about this, I was pretty sure that I'm going to talk about lots of different diet-related diseases, but it's necessary to focus on obesity, which is a disease some of the time. It's important to consider it as a disease. It is also important sometimes to leave that definition. I don't think that anyone needs to feel that they live with a disease if they live with excess weight, but it's important for research, it's important for funding, it is recognized to be a disease. When we talk about obesity then, how much are we talking about a lack of exercise? Because young people today, we know they move far less. We're all on our screens more. We commute in a different way. Over the last 30 years, we do less and less activity. And so exercise has long been seen to be part of the problem. You'll notice Exercise is Medicine has a trademark on it there. Do you know who owns the trademark on Exercise is Medicine? Does anyone know? So the trademark came out of Exercise is Medicine was a big US public health program. And it started in Atlanta. There's the governor of Atlanta, Sonny Perdue, announcing exercise is the best medicine month. And this was the American College of Sports Science and Sports Nutrition that was running this. What big company is based in Atlanta, Georgia? Coca-Cola. They own the trademark. Nearly the entire body of academic literature that promotes the idea that population weight gain is due to inactivity has been funded by the soft drinks industry, but particularly Coca-Cola. And this is a fantastic network analysis done by colleagues at Oxford and the School of Tropical Medicine, reported very widely in the New York Times almost a decade ago. And this message is still very strongly being promoted. Again, in the questions, I'm really happy to cover why exercise is so good for you, but at a population level, activity affects the number of calories we burn very little. I'd negotiate around 5% of population obesity prevalence being due to inactivity, but probably not more than that. Stress, genes, trauma, poverty, these are the deep drivers of vulnerabilities to lots and lots of harmful commodities. Gambling apps, tobacco, increased alcohol consumption, and of course, ultra-processed food or harmful food consumption. But the proximate cause of diet-related disease is not these factors in life. We need to solve all of these social determinants, but there are commercial determinants that are right next to the patients that are driving the problems. So what I want to persuade you is that obesity and diet-related disease are fundamentally commerciogenic. They are driven, that increase since 1990 from 5% to 25% at the age of 10 is nearly entirely driven by commercial factors. The proximate cause is the availability and marketing of, and I'm picking my words really carefully here, energy-dense food, high in saturated fat, sugar, and salt. We also call these ultra-processed foods, but I've formalized it in more detail just for the overview. Comparisons between food and tobacco companies are not just valid, they are important. They behave in the same way in terms of their actions and the regulatory approaches we should take to solve these problems. And the corporations are unable to self-regulate. They need mandatory intervention, and we cannot solve the problem of diet-related disease by partnering with the companies that are causing the problem. That is, I think, the most important point of what I say today. The partnership model has failed, and we have shown it has failed again and again and again. And it is the dominant model of how we regulate food in this country, is to say, you are responsible for controlling what you eat, not government, and government will partner with industry to solve these problems. Those are the two models, and I think we need to break them. So my PhD was in Greg Tower's lab, and Greg, I think, would like me to do this whole talk built around the Red Queen hypothesis, which is, a key law in evolutionary biology. I am gonna mention it because life, if we go back to the beginning of what eating really is, eating is one of the two central projects that all life has to have, but simultaneously, all life must avoid being eaten. Now, as a scientific audience, you will know there are some organisms that eat things that have never been alive, but almost all life on Earth, the bulk of the biomass, is trying to avoid being eaten whilst also simultaneously needing to eat other life. And this is the engine of evolutionary complexity. And this fossil there is a track found in the Ediacara Hills. It's roughly 500 million years old, and it's the earliest evidence we have of life eating other life. So it's just at the emergence of complex multicellular life just before the Cambrian explosion. And it was made by something like this rug here, Dickinsonia costata. And these were discovered in the mid-1940s, this explosion of complex life. And we think it was eating that drove this evolution. So this arms race continues for more than 4 billion years until one species leaves that arms race of needing to eat other life but avoiding being eaten, this predator-prey relationship. And humans started to process their food, they started to farm, and they started to create food that was intended to be eaten. They started to breed plants that were less toxic, animals that produced more milk and more meat and were more docile and easy to farm. And we extracted ourselves from that arms race with our food, but we joined another arms race. And the arms race that we are now operating at the edge of is the arms race between the multinational corporations that provide most of our calories. And we can describe that arms race between corporations using the same equations that we use to describe the arms races between different life forms competing for ecological capital. And that ecological capital is really important in evolutionary theory. There's fixed ecological capital, and it's life forms competing for it that drives this complexity, drives evolution. And there is fixed ecological capital in terms of what the companies can compete for. There is a limit to how many calories we can eat a day. We may not have reached it yet, but the companies are competing for what we call stomach share. And so this is why we've seen we no longer eat 3 times a day. We eat continuously throughout the day, and it's known as snackification. So one arms race has been replaced by another, but both arms races generate complexity. So we started to leave this arms race about 1 million years ago when we began to cook food, and then over the next 1 million years, we took a lot of the jobs of our gut and we took those jobs and put them in the kitchens. So processing is ancient and it has shaped our physiology. The minute we started cutting food with knives, our jaws could shrink, our brains could expand because our skulls no longer needed to be so big to support the musculature needed for chewing. Our teeth got smaller. When we started to cook, our guts got shorter. Our guts are much shorter than similar animals of the same body mass. So we extended our digestive physiology from inside our bodies to outside our bodies, and it made us incredibly efficient. So the point of this is that humans are obligate processivores. We must process our food. We can't survive without processing our food, and it gets us a huge amount more energy. So processing is important, it's ancient, it shaped our physiology, but ultra-processing is very, very different. And it can only be done by the companies that I've been talking about. The other theme of this talk, along with justice, is about reducing shame and stigma. So whenever we open our mouths on food and diet-related disease, we shame people. And we do it with the language we use, and do it with the pictures we use in our talks. So I've very deliberately chosen to only shame my 3 daughters, who constantly shame me every day of their lives. So I put a picture up here. This is Sasha, my middle daughter. She's a bit older than this now. And she is a child of the age of ultra-processing very much, and she loves ultra-processed food. And here she's eating ultra-processed cat food, which is made in the same factories it's made by the same companies and developed by the same scientists as our other ultra-processed foods are. So I know this because I've interviewed the scientists who make the pet food, and they move seamlessly between making food that 9 out of 10 cats can't stop eating to making food that 9 out of 10 humans can't stop eating. So they're designed using the same incentives. So how we should define harmful food is a profoundly vexed question, because there is no perfect way of doing it. Everything I'm saying is the first half of the argument that I want to continue in the questions. But so I'm setting up a lot of the pushback that I get. But one of the bits of pushback is that the definition of ultra-processed food is unclear. Well, if we think about comparing broccoli with burgers, if we think about individual food items, is broccoli healthier than a burger? If you were only going to eat one for a month, you should definitely pick the burger. If you're stranded on a desert island, definitely pick the burger. There's far more nutrients, it's much more nutrient rich, the burger, than the broccoli. And yet, broccoli forms part of a dietary pattern that is much healthier than the burger we see on the left. So there's no perfect way of defining either a healthy diet or a healthy piece of food. But we do have a few different ways of doing it in the UK. So now I want you to indulge me trying to show you just how complex and confusing current UK food policy around diet is. We have UK dietary guidance. Now this, I'm guessing, is one of the most educated rooms I'm ever going to speak to. Has anyone here ever looked up UK dietary guidance before they ate a meal? Would you know where to find it? You can. It's relatively easy. It's a couple of clicks on the internet. If you Google UK dietary guidance, there are several data tables. It's pretty good. We have the traffic lights. Have you all seen the traffic lights on the boxes? We've got a thing called HFSS. Have you all heard of that? And then we have UPF, which lots of people have now heard of, but there's a lot of confusion around it. So these are the 4 ways of understanding food as being healthy or not healthy in the UK. 3 official and 1 unofficial. These are the dietary recommendations. I'm not going to spend ages on them. They are very well evidenced. Okay, they are in agreement with lots of international guidance. The World Health Organization has basically the same guidance. And they say things like, I'm going to draw your attention there to no more than 5% of all the energy you eat in a day should come from sugars. Okay, so they're these kind of things. Salt, I can eat 6 grams of salt a day maximum. Lyra should eat 3 grams of salt a day maximum. They're well evidenced, they're completely opaque, and they're impossible to use because no one can follow all these nutrients across all the different foods they eat in a day, even if they try. Then we have traffic lights. So there's the traffic lights on a box of Cocoa Pops. Who here would say that Cocoa Pops was a healthy food? Who here would say it was an unhealthy food? Okay, it's 100%. I don't think anyone defaulted on this. I would agree, but it gets 2 green and 2 orange traffic lights. So maybe you all haven't read the nutritional information on the Cocoa Pops, and actually it's low in sugar. Well, it isn't low in sugar. It contains 3 times the number of calories recommended by UK government guidance. In other words, if you ate all your calories from Cocoa Pops, you would consume 3 times the amount of sugar and way in excess also on salt. So it is unhealthy. The traffic light guidance is non-mandatory and it is unhinged from UK dietary guidance. We're not quite sure where the thresholds come from, and this is my particularly nerdy area of expertise. So traffic lights are voluntary, and that's why if you look at a can of Coke, it does have traffic lights because Coke gets 3 green traffic lights and 1 red for sugar. So Coke is 75% healthy, and so are most sugary drinks, according to traffic lights. Then we have HFSS, okay? HFSS is a binary designation. If a food is high fat, salt, sugar, you can't market it to people the age of some of you in the audience. You can't market it to children. Okay, and we work out if a food is HFSS not by looking at UK dietary guidance, but by using this equation here. We add up points for fat, salt, and sugar. We subtract points for protein and fiber. We get a score. If it gets a certain score, then it's high fat, salt, sugar. Cocoa Pops is not HFSS, which is why you see ads for it. And Nutella is not HFSS either. Now, Nutella is half fat and half sugar with almost nothing else in it. The reason is that the HFSS equation is only applied to certain categories of food. And the category which includes chocolate spreads is exempt. So no matter what you make Nutella and other chocolate spreads from, it can never be designated HFSS. You may also notice, if you pay attention to these things, that you see quite a lot of these McCrispy ads around. Has anyone seen a McCrispy ad? And has anyone here ever thought, that's a bit weird, because I don't see lots of ads for other things like McCrispy. I noticed this. I watched the football or walked down the street. And I took this in Glasgow the other day. There is an exemption, marketing to children, if your product is also your brand. In other words, if McCrispy is a range, like Kit Kat Chunky, then you can do product advertisement even if it is in fact high fat, salt, sugar. So Kit Kat Chunky, there are 4 of them. Kit Kat Chunky is not a product, it's a brand range. It pre-existed the legislation, and so you can show a picture of that product to people the age of some of you in the audience. Now, I personally think this is a little bit like being able to advertise one type of cigarette and not another type of cigarette. I think the functional effect on the food environment is that we still see pictures of chocolate and burgers all over the place, and it makes very little difference which ones they are of. What I'm trying to say is the law is so poorly defined at every stage. The category exemptions are so huge. The definition is so light, and the exemptions are so strong that there is functionally no regulation of marketing of harmful food to young people in this country whatsoever. Then we have the definition ultra-processed food. It comes out of Brazil. It comes out of Brazil because free trade agreements in the 90s meant that there was an influx of American and European industrially processed food. These are Nestle door-to-door salespeople in a favela in Rio. Nestle had the most astounding marketing strategy, I think, in the history of food marketing. They went door-to-door. They went deep, deep into the Amazon. They floated a supermarket hundreds of kilometers up the Amazon River, reaching deep into the indigenous communities in the interior of the forest. And the supermarket, of course, was bringing them lots of confectionery, ice cream, salty, sugary food. And so in a very short space of time, obesity went from being essentially unheard of in Brazil, the dominant problem was malnutrition, to being the dominant public health problem. And Brazilian scientists saw very clearly the kind of products that were causing this nutrition transition. And so they tried to create a long definition. This is Carlos Monteiro. His team wrote the definition, and he's now a colleague and a collaborator of mine. And I would say it's the longest category definition in science that I'm aware of. I'd love, if any of you know a longer one, I'd love you to send it to me. It's 11 paragraphs long. It's housed on the United Nations Food and Agriculture Organization website. It's been used in hundreds, probably thousands of scientific studies now. People don't like this definition. Lots of people don't like this definition. But the definition is settled and accepted and used for research. So it's inaccurate to say it is a disputed definition. It's not a disputed definition. It exists, it's reified, it's crystallized. It has two key elements. The first of which is the purpose of the food, the purpose of the processing of the food. So it forms part of a food classification system called NOVA. And ultra-processed food has a particular purpose, which means that you cannot make it at home. If you live with celiac disease and you cook bread at home with xanthan gum, you are not ultra-processing bread in your kitchen. You are just doing cooking. Okay, the purpose of ultra-processed food is to create, by definition, convenient, hyperpalatable, profitable products. And by profitable, we're talking about financialized growth for big institutions, for pension funds and hedge funds. It's about creating products that have intellectual property that can be advertised and promoted. And it's about, by definition, displacing traditional and domestically cooked food. Okay? The working definition that you can all use to figure out if a product is ultra-processed is if there's something in it that you don't usually find in a domestic kitchen, like glucose or high fructose corn syrup or modified cornstarch, then it's very likely to be ultra-processed. And the logic is best thought about by putting yourself in the position of imagining that you run a food company. And I want you to do this a few points today, but I want you to imagine we've got 3 food companies here. You guys, and you guys. There are only 2 ways that you can make money in the arms race to compete for the ecological capital of stomach share. You can drop the price of your ingredients, or you can sell more food more often. And the logic of the Red Queen hypothesis is that you must, all of you, do both of those things as hard as you can, constantly, just to stay in the same place. And so what you're going to do to drop the price of ingredients is you're going to chop down tropical forest where there's lots and lots of solar energy to grow calories. And you're going to feed those calories to meat, or you're going to put those calories in the food. And you're mainly going to grow soy, rice, wheat, corn, and you're going to turn those whole foods into their raw pastes and powders, into their carbs, their fats, and their proteins. You're going to separate all of those out. And you're going to use those 3 substrates, carbs, fats, and proteins, to rebuild any one of hundreds of thousands of products by emulsifying, stabilizing, preserving, flavoring, coloring, and enhancing the taste. So ultra-processed food all has a fairly similar ingredient makeup, and the logic is determined by driving down the price of ingredients so they are pennies per ton, not pounds per kilo. So you take your corn, you can process it, as humans have been doing since the Mayans and the Aztecs in Mesoamerica, nixtamalizing corn and making cornbread. You can do this, but this isn't how we eat our corn. We eat our corn in the form of these modified corn starches and high fructose corn syrup. And we can do the same with rice, wheat, corn, soy. They have different proportions of the nutrients. And we can use them to make a whole range of products. Some of it's obviously unhealthy. This is strawberry ice cream with no strawberries, no ice, and no cream. But most of it is sold to us as healthy. And this is one of the really big problems. I've never found an exception to the rule that if a product has a health claim on the box of any kind, it will be ultra-processed and it will be unhealthy. And those are 2 separate statements. Lots of it, lots of food that we all enjoy eating regularly. The most extreme example is the ultra-processing of water, which is a good experiment to do if you have kids in a lab or you're doing it at school. So water plus sugar. Does anyone here, when they get a glass of water, ever add a few spoonfuls of sugar to it? Yeah, and you're all laughing. It would be a disgusting thing to do, isn't it? And yet it ought to be nicer, but for lots of reasons it becomes less disgusting. Now, if you add a few drops of phosphoric acid, and I've done this, it becomes a little bit nicer. If you add the phosphoric acid to the 9 spoonfuls of sugar that would be in a glass of fizzy drink. If you then add caffeine for bitterness and a selection of different flavorings and carbon dioxide to further mask the intense sweetness of the sugar on the tongue, and a curvy bottle, and you refrigerate it, and you put Olympic athletes there, you've ultra-processed water, and you've created a product that, if you optimize it in the right way, means that people will drink beyond thirst. The goal of the corporations that make most of our food is to tackle the thorny problem of homeostasis. You have incredible homeostatic mechanisms in your body that regulate your CO2 excretion, your oxygen intake, your water intake, your calorific intake, lots of your nutrient intake. But you can subvert them if you're clever enough and get people to buy more liquid than their hypothalamic pituitary axis would tell them. Now, I said earlier that saying a food is ultra-processed is not the same as saying it's harmful. That's true of individual products. It's no longer true of a dietary pattern. We have so much evidence around the harm of a diet of ultra-processed food. We're now very confident, I feel very confident in saying that we have established, we've reached the threshold for causal inference. It does, a dietary pattern of UPF does cause health harms. We've got, there's so much evidence, it's almost impossible to summarize it. We have now, I think, 6 RCTs on UPF itself, plus many, many other randomized controlled trials, so the evidence gold standard around the properties of ultra-processed food. We've got more than 32 systematic reviews and meta-analyses linking a dietary pattern to lots of what we euphemistically call negative health outcomes, but really we should call sickness and early death from all causes. And we put all this together. The RCT evidence is really important because the randomized controlled trials are mostly, they are crossover designed. So we take all of you, we split you into 2 groups, we feed you nutritionally matched diets for a few weeks, and then we swap you over. So everyone eats the food in a different order. And in this was the first RCT randomized controlled trial on ultra-processed food. And these 2 diets, one is ultra-processed, one is a whole food diet, but they're matched for salt and protein and fiber and sugar and fat, and participants are given as much energy to eat as they want. So it is what we call ad libitum. People can eat as much food as they want. And what Kevin Hall at the NIH established is that on the ultra-processed diet, which is rated as being equally delicious to the non-ultra-processed diet, people ate 500 calories more per day. So that's roughly 1 Big Mac more per day. And that calorific intake correlated precisely with the expected weight gain. So there are not magic calories in ultra-processed food. The additives do not alter your metabolism. As far as we know, that at least concerns around that are still very emerging. We can explain the weight gain because these are foods engineered so you eat more of them. Is that clear? It's a really important point because it's often misunderstood that the food has some odd property. It is just that you eat more calories. And this is a trial from Japan and a trial done by my group at UCL, which we published in Nature Medicine last summer. There is a discussion that I'm going to give other examples of, that ultra-processed food is just simply salty, fatty, sugary food, and the whole concept of the processing is redundant, and we don't need to worry about it. In fact, when we adjust in the population data, just like the randomized control trials, we can fix the amounts of salt, fat, sugar, and fiber and the dietary quality. We see the effect on human health remains the same in magnitude, in size, the size effects are the same, and also in statistical significance. In other words, it is the processing of the food that is important. The purpose of the processing matters. And we drew this all together in a big Lancet series, which we published last autumn, which you can access for free if you subscribe to the Lancet. And that's where we formally said it has reached the formal criteria to say a dietary pattern causes harm. And I won't dwell on all of these. Apart from the last one, plausibility. It's a really important aspect of establishing causality. This idea that eating ultra-processed food is not simply something done by populations who live with other disadvantages. It's not just food eaten by people who smoke more and who drink more alcohol and who live in poverty. It's the food itself which drives the harm. Again, imagine yourselves running your food companies. If you imagine yourself on the product development team, is it plausible if you were designing products made to generate growth for institutional investors, for pension funds, how would you design products that did not drive weight gain? Would that really be feasible? The other aspect of plausibility is that work that we've just had accepted for publication which I was accepted 2 days ago, is that my group at UCL have done an analysis with the WHO, and we've shown that more than 95%, more than 98% of ultra-processed food products are high in calories, salt, fat, and or sugar, according to UK dietary guidance. So the idea that this food doesn't cause harm is almost impossible, whether or not you believe that the processing is important or not. How does it cause the harm? Well, the barrel is so full of fish, it's hard exactly to hit the right one. Primarily, it drives excess consumption. It displaces your whole food diet. So more than 60% of the calories on average that we eat in the UK come from ultra-processed food, which is high in salt and fat and sugar and energy. There's a growing concern around this exposome idea, the migrant molecules from the plastics that the food is microwaved in or contained in on the shelf at room temperature, that may have endocrine altering effects. There are inflammatory effects and microbiome altering effects of some of the additives. We're increasingly sure that the non-nutritive sweeteners and the emulsifiers have really significant effects on the gut lining and the microbiome. And if there was a single property of ultra-processed food that we could solve to really, really improve population health, it would be dental decay. It is the primary cause of dental decay in this country, and dental decay is the main reason kids are admitted to hospital in the UK. It's the number one reason that kids have general anaesthetics. So if we did nothing else, this dental decay is a massively neglected area of work. So my group also looked at this idea of purpose, and the companies who make ultra-processed food claim the food has a different purpose. They make quite extravagant claims about cleaning up plastic, reducing carbon emissions, improving public health, increasing the wages of their workforce. And so we did an analysis where we held these claims up to their own financial data and simply said, when the companies make money, do they spend it on the things they say they're going to spend the money on? And the answer is no. It's very clear that they don't spend anything significant on public health outcomes. They spend it on doing things that all companies do for sensible reasons from the perspective of the company, share buybacks and dividend payouts, because that's the purpose of the companies. And when I speak to analysts inside the financial services industry, this BlackRock analyst was the clearest about it when she said the companies are not in control of their business model. They can't decide to do different things. They can't choose to make less money. And the clearest illustration of that was Emmanuel Faber, who's the CEO of Danone. And he wanted, I think sincerely, to improve the product portfolio at Danone, one of the biggest food companies. And he wanted to turn Danone into a social enterprise. And he was ousted by Bluebell Capital, who were a small hedge fund, and he was fired. And this is one of the main arguments against the partnership model, is the CEOs are unable to improve the products at the company because they are answerable to the owner, because the purpose of Danone is to make money for the owners of Danone, which isn't a conspiracy. It's a statement of logic and fact. So these financial incentives take the corporations beyond simply making tasty food and putting it in front of us. So we know that two of the biggest companies, Unilever and Pepsi, employed teams of neuroscientists to optimize products. And I went and spoke to the head of neuroscience at one of these companies, who, when talking about feeding people ice cream in brain scanners that look at where blood flow changes in the brain, he said that when we got the formula right, when we fed them the ice cream, the orbitofrontal cortex, which is the bit of your brain just above your eyeballs that deals with reward and is linked to addiction, he said, and these were his words, it lit up like a furnace. So if you have ever struggled with putting the tub of Ben & Jerry's or another ice cream back in the freezer after you've made a small bowl, and you've finished your small bowl, then you go back to the freezer and you make another small bowl, then you finish that and you go back, as certainly I have and as many of you have, you are dealing with products that have been optimized by geniuses using functional MRI as part of an arsenal of incredibly sophisticated scientific techniques. We know the products that we enjoy or at least use today have been optimized by A/B testing, by big focus groups over many, many decades. And the thing that the companies measure, that when I speak to product development scientists, they're very clear about, is they measure how fast do people eat food and how much of it do they eat. So they get groups like you, they test ice cream, fizzy drinks, biscuits, breakfast cereals, and that is the crucial metric. And every year, the products that I enjoyed as a child have been re-optimized and tweaked so that the next generation are eating products that are even harder to stop eating. Is ultra-processed food addiction? So food addiction is a controversial idea. Baked into the notion of addiction is the idea of abstinence, and that's really complicated with food. Although the UPF definition helps, because at least in theory it's possible to be abstinent from ultra-processed food. In reality, economically, most people can't. The companies themselves seem very comfortable with using addiction as a marketing tool. That some people in this room, my age and older, will remember the mascots that advertised us breakfast cereals and junk food when we were kids. And all of those mascots had addicted relationships with the products they were advertising, including committing crimes to get the food, smashing down walls. There was Hamburglar, was a McDonald's mascot. So the companies seem very comfortable with this. And there is emerging research, and I would love questions on this, that for a long time it's been very uncomfortable talking about harmful food in the context of disordered eating, binge eating disorder, restrictive eating, food addiction. I think there is a growing concern in the eating disorders community, who I work with very closely, that it may be very hard to have a healthy relationship with foods that have been engineered to make them hard to stop eating. And that's something I think lots of people in this room I know will have lived experience of eating disorders. And the emerging evidence is that for most of the products that people struggle with, almost all of the products, are these ultra-processed products. So how did we get to this stage? And am I being a bit extreme using tobacco as an example? I've tried to build a case that's taken us to this idea of addiction. Well, it's important to remember the history of ultra-processed food. In the mid-1980s, the two biggest tobacco companies on earth were R.J. Reynolds and Philip Morris, making Marlboro. And they bought, over a fairly long period of time, the biggest food companies in the world. So that for more than a decade, the biggest tobacco companies were the biggest food companies, and vice versa. And they created a range of products that some of you will have eaten today. If you look at that list of brands, there'll be people in this room who've eaten products developed inside tobacco companies. And they used the marketing techniques from the cigarettes, the loyalty programs, and they applied them to the kids' food products. And my favorite example of the parallels between ultra-processed food and cigarette products is Lunchables. The cigarette companies, regarded ultra-processed food and cigarettes as the same kind of products. They're low-priced consumer packaged goods with huge retail markets. You take a commodity crop, soy, rice, wheat, corn, tobacco, you put additives in it, you optimize it and engineer it to be addictive, you market it in the same way, you wrap it in plastic, and you sell it in the same shops. It's the same stuff. And the Synergies Committee was a committee at Philip Morris that took the science from Marlboro Lights and applied it to Lunchables. And the genius of this technique was Lunchables ended up with two properties. For the adult giving it to the child, it is a gift, and it's wrapped and presented like a gift, and they optimized that. But the child experiences it as a toy. So the grown-up feels less guilty, the child has fun with the food, but it was all developed by the people who gave us Marlboro Lights, which, by the way, are no healthier than any other, or less deadly than any other type of cigarettes. The light idea, the low tar idea, was that better for you formulation that came out of Philip Morris. So UPF has this double jeopardy. It's got more fat and salt and sugar per bite, and because of all this optimization, you take more bites. That's where we link old nutrition science, the dominance of fat, salt, sugar, and energy, which is absolutely true. It meshes precisely with the explanation for why we have started to eat more. And the ultra-processing is why you eat the fat, salt, and sugar. But the fat, salt, and sugar are part of the ultra-processing. They are part of the reason, the hyperpalatability aspect of the food, where the perfect ratios of salt, fat, and sugar have been mixed together. That is one of the reasons you can't stop eating it. So the UPF evidence is explanatory, and it shows us that the purpose of processing is important. It tells us the companies we need to regulate. It doesn't tell us exactly how we regulate them. Ultra-processed food science and the literature I've referred to doesn't just tell us about why human dietary health is deteriorating. It is the nexus where planetary and human health meet. So UPF, the system that produces ultra-processed food, is the number one cause of deforestation, the leading cause of loss of biodiversity. This is the aerial river through the Amazon that is required to have the rain that falls on what is now soy fields. When you cut down rainforest, rain no longer falls. So we're seeing rising food insecurity. Ultra-processed food system does not create food security. This is the holding page of the Coca-Cola Corporation global website last year. And you would imagine from this that Coca-Cola was an NGO dedicated to plastic cleanup, even as they were voted, or evidence showed that for the 5th year in a row, they were the world's leading plastic polluter. So the companies are not clear. If you care about plastic pollution, if you care about antimicrobial resistance, deforestation, UPF is the place where these problems meet. I want you all to just imagine the biggest pig farm in the world. Okay, everyone got a clear picture, the fields of pigs, lots of pigs. Okay, that's the biggest pig farm in the world. There are hundreds of them. If you care about animal welfare, risk of pandemic disease, the ultra-processed food system is what is driving these problems. And yet we see headlines like these. Now, these are from October 2023, a few months after my book was first published. And a press conference was held really in response to the publication of my book. And the press conference was organized by the Science Media Center, and they had 5 scientists speaking, 4 of whom had conflicts of interest with the food industry. But Richard Milne, over the weekend, sent me another headline, actually by one of the same journalists who'd produced one of those headlines I just showed you three years ago. Ultra-processed food may not all be bad, it depends on how we eat them. And this headline came out of a new randomized controlled trial, and there was a commentary on it in Science by 3 of the authors, one of whom had led this big RCT. There's the randomized controlled trial. This is the commentary in Science. And they did this crossover diet, and they showed that you can feed, instead of making one diet minimally processed and one diet ultra-processed, they took a group of 40 people, so a little smaller than this room. They gave them crossover diets, but they were both ultra-processed, but one was much chewier and took longer to eat than the other. And they showed that if you made the ultra-processed food chewy, people ate 370 fewer calories per day. And they used this to argue that if we only could make ultra-processed food more chewy and less energy dense, then we could really solve the problem. And so the problem isn't ultra-processed food, it's the fact that food is too soft. And so we need to really leave the concept of ultra-processed food behind. Now, I know what you're thinking. You're thinking, well, this is probably industry producing a study that's muddying the water. But if we look at one of the trial authors in the commentary in Science, it says, this was the conclusion in the commentary: collectively available randomized controlled trials provide weak support for an ultra-processing specific effect of UPFs. None of the authors have received personal financial awards, honoraria, or consultancy fees from the industry. So it's really intriguing to wonder why the food is soft. This was a good trial, and it does show a thing that is factually accurate. Soft, energy-dense food massively leads to weight gain. But did the companies know this? Well, the Nestle Nutrition Institute, all of the big food companies, in fact, style themselves as scientific research institutes. They have massive budgets. And so they do know this. They've known this since the 90s. We've done masses of research on soft, energy-dense diets. And so the question is, who was engineering the food within the company to be soft when the companies knew this? The food is not soft by accident. And why was this RCT done to establish a thing that had already been demonstrated multiple times over? Well, that disclosure was inaccurate because one of the lead authors on the big randomized controlled trial had been the senior research scientist at Nestle for 11 years, where he studied research on the sensory and cognitive factors that influence food intake. The companies know exactly how to make food that we can't stop eating. And the food is not soft and energy dense by accident. It's energy dense and soft because that's what survives in the arms race in the marketplace. You can make healthy ultra-processed food. It's really easy to do it. You can add fiber, you can make it chewy, you can take out calories, you can add more whole food, but it doesn't sell. And that's why they don't do it. And so this, I think, is a really brilliant illustration of what is, in my opinion, marketing research that seeks to create confusion and disrupt the commentary. The Science Media Centre that organised that initial press conference is funded by some of the biggest food companies. And they do lots of good work. I speak to the Science Media Centre a lot. In my opinion, this funding has biased a lot of their commentary around UPF. The information environment in the UK is saturated by food industry conflicts of interest. Our biggest food charity, the British Nutrition Foundation, is majority funded by companies like and including these. In 2023, the British Nutrition Foundation's Healthy Eating Week was sponsored by Coca-Cola. In my opinion, they are not a charity with a primary interest in population health or food justice. They are a front group for industry. And our new Food Policy Committee, this is our government committee, is the Secretariat includes these food companies and is co-chaired by the Institute for Grocery Distribution, which sounds like fruit and veg, but it isn't fruit and veg. It's an industry group funded by the biggest food companies that you all know. So we have, and our Scientific Advisory Committee on Nutrition, this is a BMJ investigation, found a majority of members had financial relationships with companies like and including these. So from government all the way down to little influencers like me, there are a lot of conflicts. Now, this is an email I got from McDonald's in 2023, and they invited me to be an inspirational, thought-provoking, yet realistic ambassador on food and nutrition. And so I'm very proud to speak to you today in my capacity as McDonald's ambassador. No, I didn't take the money, but I asked a friend how much it would have been, and it was a huge amount of money. But I couldn't have an email between me and McDonald's saying, how much are we talking? I'm overrunning a bit, for which forgive me. We still have a lot of time for questions. I want to finish up by thinking, what does ultra-processed food teach us about other industries? I hope I've persuaded you about the links with tobacco. I think they're clear, real, and well evidenced. And we know there are other consumer-facing industries which influence our health. There's alcohol, there's gambling. The two charities, Drink Aware, Gamble Aware. Do you notice that it's odd, the imperative to both drink and gamble? Drink, but be aware. Drink responsibly is on a lot of your bottles. Well, they're both funded by the industries that they're attempting to regulate. We've got social media and a growing list, I think, of industries that we're increasingly aware affect human health. The industries that we actually purchase directly from, automotive industry, firearms, not in this country, but of course in the US, and fast fashion being a massive driver of plastic pollution. So there are industries that affect our health that we buy from. And sitting beneath those consumer-facing industries, we then have another layer of harmful industries that it's much harder to disentangle our relationship with. The cheap credit industry that borrows from us at very cheap rates. You know, our banks will pay us 2-3% if we're lucky, but they'll lend to us at 12 to 16%. And these products are very much part of the purchasing infrastructure. And then there's a layer below that of the commodities that actually make up the products that we're buying. Are there any exceptions to the idea of companies being harmful? Because I think in this field of commercial determinants of health, we've started out with tobacco, alcohol, gambling, and we've started to include firearms, pesticides, cars. Do you know what the most hated industry in the United States is? Every year Gallup do a poll and they ask the population, they give, I think it's 25 different industries, law, health insurance, firearms, journalism, food, everything you can think of, including the government. Do you know what the most hated industry is? It's the single industry with the stated aim of improving and extending human life, the pharmaceutical industry. For several years in a row, it's the most hated. And the pharma should be an exception because it does unquestionably create life-saving medicines, many of which I use in my practice. And yet, even when we look at pharma, if we look at it in detail through this lens of commercial determinants, they charge a huge amount for drugs that it's surprising they are still able to do, drugs that should be off patent like insulin. They fail to develop and drugs like HIV medicines. There are new HIV medicines that the cost of retail compared to manufacturer is a multiple of several logs, of more than 100-fold. They also fail to develop medicines for diseases where there isn't a market, and they over-market the medicines for diseases where the product works extremely well for a small group of people, but the drug is then sold to a much larger group of people. And the industry distorts the scientific and public health conversation around an issue. So we see this with GLP-1 drugs, the new weight loss drugs. They're incredible drugs. They work. They're the best intervention we have had in the history of interventions for weight gain and obesity. And yet they are sucking resource and energy from and money from doing things like feeding kids well at school. There is a finite pot of money. Good companies. There must be some instances of good companies. So the one company I really think is a good company, and I shop from them, I buy their yogurts, is Yo Valley. And I really think they farm in an organic way, so they're not destroying the planet, and they make lots of whole food. And they were in the Telegraph a few weeks ago opposing improving a UK government definition of harmful food that would shift Cocoa Pops from being not HFSS into being HFSS. So I think in the food system, there are no exceptions. The companies act en masse to oppose anything that would regulate them. And I think you can make quite a convincing argument that we talk about the tobacco playbook. You'll have heard that phrase. Food are using the tobacco playbook. And the tobacco are using the oil industry playbook. Or in fact, all of these companies are using the playbook developed by the Dutch and British East India companies almost as soon as limited liability corporations were invented in the 17th century. None of this is to argue against capitalism, but it is possible to imagine different forms of capitalism that place public interest and health equity at a different point. So this is a drug company run by a friend of mine in Australia. It's a not-for-profit pharma company. It returns money to investors, but its purpose is not generating financial growth. Its purpose is improving access to healthcare. So when it comes to food, for me, the solution, the aim is to improve justice and equity. It's to make the system fair. And that is achievable. It was fair just a few decades ago. Tobacco is the template. We did it with tobacco. We did it with asbestos. We did it with seatbelts. We did it with lead in petrol. We did it with lead in paint. It can be done. It requires heroic effort and pay cuts on the part of lots of people. But the first thing that has to happen in all of those instances of success is industry were forced out of the regulatory room. All of the partnership was abolished in every single instance. You cannot partner with the people who are causing the problem you're trying to solve. And when it comes to food, we begin with warning labels. We clearly designate the product that needs regulation. And this is what we're seeing in South and Central America, where the problem is so obvious to everyone. It's being caused by these new products. It caused the problem almost overnight. When we put these warning labels on food, and then you take the monkey off the box, you take the health claims off the box, you restrict the marketing properly to children, children start asking their parents to buy different food. We've got brilliant evidence from Chile, from Camila Corvalán there. So we've tried, in the theory of change, we can do carrots, we can do gentle persuasion, we can create consumer demand, and that is really important, to persuade an audience like you, and particularly young people, that you need to start demanding different food, and you need to create a mandate for politicians to act. But the sticks are much more effective, and in all of those instances of success, we see it is legal action and significant financial penalties. So this is the master settlement against big tobacco at the end of the 1990s. This check grew and grew to be hundreds of billions, forced disclosures, and this is the reason we're not all sitting in this room smoking today. If we'd had this lecture in the late 80s, you would have been smoking, I would have been smoking. And we've just started to see, so the work of my group and other collaborators around the world was cited in this first statewide legal action against big food announced by the city attorney in San Francisco, and I think we're going to see more and more of this. We've seen the actions against Meta and Google happen as well. So I want to persuade you that we need really strict regulation, and the number one thing is to end the financial relationships between the people that are causing the problem, the institutions that are causing the problem, and all of us, whether we are informal regulators like me. You know, I'm a regulator in a sense. I get to persuade people on this. I go on the BBC, all the way through to the formal government committees. They all need to deconflict before we can solve the problem. Thank you very much, all of you, for listening.